I've just completed putting the canvas back on the frame. Is it an easy or difficult DIY? Middle of the road is the way I describe it. There's a lot of parts, but overall it's not particularly difficult. And for someone who's reasonably competent working on their car, I don't think this would be too much of a stretch. Things that make it a little bit more difficult, there are a number of spots along here where you need to drill out rivets. A lot of those rivets spun, which is a bit of a pain, so I had to grind those out. When I've installed it, I haven't put rivets back in all of these places. I have glued screws to the other side, which is what I did to my other roof, and screwed those together. So that makes the fitting a little bit more extensive because you've got to let the glue set, etc. before you screw everything together. But it just makes it far easier later on if you need to pull things apart again. And if there's anything I know about convertible roofs, having owned them for a while, is that with so many moving parts, then things will wear out, things will break, and you will need to take this thing off and replace it as time goes on. So if it's a car that you plan to keep for a while, you may consider doing that. But other than that, riveting them on is perfectly acceptable because that's clearly what they do in the factory. Apart from that, the rear seal up the back here runs around the back. It holds on the canvas at the back. It's hard work getting that back in. I'll show you how to do that. But apart from that, just be very organised. Take lots of photos, have Ziploc bags, etc. of all of the parts that come off so you don't lose things. But yeah, it's definitely a doable DIY. To remove the canvas from the frame, I'll assume that you have already removed the liner. I've made a video on how to remove the liner. So have a look at that. That is with the roof still attached to the car. It is much, much easier to do it when it's like this. So I would advise removing the roof from the car, lying it out in a big blanket like I've done here, and then removing it like this, because it's far easier to remove things. You're going to be drilling out a lot of rivets. There'll be a lot of debris, even with a vacuum cleaner and trying to keep it clean. It is much easier to keep things clean and then clean it afterwards and not get stuff in the motors, etc. when it's like this. So I would absolutely advocate doing it when it's out of the car. But when we first get the liner off, we'll assume that the strip here is already removed because that will need to have been done to get the liner off. You'll see this big piece of polystyrene. There's a single screw on each side. Take that off, and then the piece of foam can be removed. You'll see the wiring harness, which will be plugged into a number of spots along here. You can disconnect those. There are two plugs to the hook mechanism, and then remove the wiring harness and get that out of the way. You don't need to remove the hook. However, it does make it lighter. It's entirely up to you, and if you were here, I'd probably advise pulling that off and checking the micro switches aren't bent on the other side, and super gluing those if required. If you're going to remove those, make sure you mark the position of those screws so it goes back in the correct place. Then there are going to be the two screws that go, those two there on the inside here. I've marked where those screws go because there's a lot of flexibility in their position, so make sure you mark where they go. Also on here, there's going to be this big strip with 5 screws along here. You'll need to remove all of those, so that comes free. You'll have this piece of webbing there which is held under this big metal tab. So remove those 2 screws there, take off the metal tab, and then remove the webbing. I've just put that back on there just so I don't lose the screws and everything's kept in the right spot. Once you've done that, there are going to be 3 rivets here. Now I've put screws in here and some nuts on the other side for the install rather than rivet, but for all of the rivets they are going to be 4mm by 10mm long is what you need to use. But I'm screwing them on so I can pull this thing apart as required later on. But enough said, that's going to be slotted in that quarter there. You'll have 3 rivets there that need to be drilled out. Be really careful when you drill these ones out because if you're like for example, if you don't use a drill bit that is a good bit bigger than the hole, so it's going to be a bit over a 4mm hole, so I'd advise at least a 5mm drill bit. Very easy to, once the heads come off, to push it out the other side and go through the canvas. So just be careful with that. So we'll need to drill those 3 out, and this thing will be able to be shuffled rearwards. You'll have to lift this up and sort of get this clear at the back, and then you'll be able to move this rearwards. And then once you've done that, you'll have this cable that sits over and it slides down that slot there. That'll be in that hole there. So you'll need to, and that'll be jammed in like that. You'll need to push that forward and allow that to come free. And then you'll eventually be able to slide this thing out. Because of these points here at each end, it's a really, really snug fit. So you need to push it back probably a good 5 or 6 centimetres to get that out. With that cable there, that can just get pulled out of that little sleeve there. You'll need to drill out 2 rivets that are on this arm there. One of them holds those 2 straps, and the other one will hold the pleat cord. And then there are going to be 5 rivets that need to be drilled out of here. Along this beam here, this plastic piece will be pressed into it. It's pretty easy to put it in. You just press it in and move your way along. To get it out, don't pull from the front, it won't come out, because the piece of plastic that hooks into it is like a little bit of a hook. You've got to pull it from the back. So pull it from the back, and then it'll come out all the way along pretty easily. You will have 2 flaps here. One of those is an expansion rivet for that one there. The other one is a screw for that one there. They're both T30, I think, so just remove both of those. It's a bit hard to show you, but there's another flap that wraps around the big arm, which is riveted to the inside here. You'll need to remove that. And then once that happens, this all sort of comes a little bit free, and then we can remove the piece from the back that runs, and this runs all the way around. I'll show you that a bit closer in a moment. But in a nutshell, you remove the seal first. There's a plug that sits on the front, that comes out. Then the seal comes off all the way around, and then you can unhook the bit that then pulls the whole bit out of the back of the rail. At the back here, where the arm here holds onto the window, this thing just comes out like that. But there's going to be a little clip in that slot there, so you'll just need a little baby pick tool to get in there and just pull that straight up, and that just pops straight out. Keep your hand over the top of it so it doesn't end up on the other side of the shed. You'll also need to disconnect this electrical connector for the back window. That'll go through a little sort of hooky thing there, but to get this out, it doesn't just pull straight out. There's a little hole in the electrical connector. So what you'll need to do is just peel back the insulation layer a bit and just get a tiny little fine pick tool and push down on the tab that's maybe a couple of millimeters back on the underside of it. So push it down, and then that comes out, and that's on both sides. So the way the back seal and the canvas is held on all the way around the back, in a nutshell, this clip would have sat over there like that with the drain hole, this line connector. You just pull that off, and then this would have been sitting up inside there. And let's put it back into the correct position. So that would have been sitting there kind of like that, if you understand what I'm talking about. And then all you do is, after the rubber hose is disconnected, you can get in here and just push this rearwards, and it comes out. And then once it's like that, there's not a whole bunch of room to move, but then you can sort of push it down into this gap in here, and that just comes straight out. And then, I'm not sure if you can see, but I've pulled out a bit of the bit that holds the roof. That just gets held by this little knob in here that runs around the whole length of it. And the seal that runs around the back just gets slotted up into here, and that is what holds the back of the roof in place. So I'll pull the seal sort of half out. It gets pulled out of there. You can see those bits that would have slotted down in here, and that just gets pulled out all the way around. And then once that's done, then you can just unclip that, and that will then allow you to remove the bottom of the canvas all the way around. And once that seal's been removed, and we have removed all those rivets and unscrewed those and lifted that around this corner here, then the bottom of the canvas can be pulled out. I would suggest getting a screwdriver in here and just getting it going for the first inch or two to start off with, and then once it's out like that, so you're not grabbing hold of the canvas but you're holding onto that rubber bit, then it will just pull out quite happily all the way around. Prior to installing this part here on the rear part of the roof, this bit around here, just put a light coating of oil on this, because that's going to be in there that you're going to have to push over that when you install the seal, which is very, very tight. This is going to make that a little bit easier. Installation of the canvas, put it in at one end so it's flush here, and then we can go around, and I just used this plastic trim removal tool just to push that into place, and that just popped it into place really, really easily. So you just do that from one side and work your way all the way around to the other. This is the rear seal, and fitting this, it's very, very tight. So firstly, before you try and fit this, make sure you clean it, because it's going to have years worth of grime, especially in the spot between the canvas and the seal. There's just going to be loads of dirt and stuff, so you want to get rid of that, otherwise that'll end up all over the canvas when you fit it. And we need to clean up this slot here, which is where the piece of metal on that rear rail is going to go into, and I'm going to try and put a really light coating of oil on it just so it slides down, because it's a very tight fit. And all I've done is I've jammed a piece of paper towel in here, just a drop or two of oil in there, and then just run that around, and every couple of feet or so I'll just put another drop of oil, and that will clean out the whole thing so it's nice and clean, and put a nice coating of oil on everything so it will install a little bit easier. When you're fitting this rear seal on both sides to start it off, you want the roof like this, fit it on the rail here, and as you're pushing it down and sliding it down that way, fit the tab that goes in on the other side and push it all the way home, and then you'll have to get a rubber mallet and really whack this quite hard to get it to drive down onto that rail. You need to push it far enough so the rubber there is pretty much flush with the metal rail underneath it. We'll do that on both sides, and just leaving the roof seal like that, and then we're going to turn it over and whack it in from the other side. And as you're whacking it in with your rubber mallet on this side, you'll know it's in far enough, because this little piece that sort of sticks out on the rubber here will go down and touch the canvas. And then once you've whacked it in a bunch down both sides, then you can just get this and put that over the other side like that, and continue putting that in place. And when you're whacking this in, even though the rail goes down like that, hit it in more from the side. For some reason, it just goes in much easier when you're hitting it like that. When reinstalling the canvas, this flap that wraps around the main arm, that had a 4mm rivet in it, but then I looked closely at the hole and it was tapped with an M5 thread. So I've just put M5 screws in there, which is much more convenient than riveting it. Torques for everything here, for the locks, 36 Newton meters. For the screws that hold the metal plate here to the frame, I could not find a spec for the torque in that, but they're M8, so I'm going to use 23 Newton meters. The one that holds onto this strap here, 9 Newton meters, and those along there, 6 Newton meters.